arguments here. Well, who needs all these democratic processes and opposition and criticizing of the government? And thank God, it never happened in that country. And from the very first moment, we had that opposition that was vocal and critical, and we had the Knesset that was very vibrant from the very first day. And even the first legislation in the first Knesset, and it's not that I'm so wonderfully educated in the history of the Knesset, I'll share a secret with you tonight. I'm going to the first night screening of a documentary about the first Knesset, and my first predecessor, the first speaker of the Knesset. So I had to learn some facts. And even the first legislation of the Knesset was fiercely attacked by the opposition that claimed that Knesset was even not Knesset, it was not really a parliament, it was just a kind of an assembly and had no business to start legislating. So that was the first discussion taking place, in, not here, but in a different building in Tel Aviv. That's this. Getting back to our subject, I think that Knesset in this sense is no different from the parliaments you know and the parliaments you work in. Serious parts of our activities are supervising the budget, dealing with the budget, dealing with different financial reforms. Probably sometimes in the international press it gets less attention than peace processes and other things happening here in this building, but I think that for an average MK, I would dare say that would be the majority of the time spent, especially for the members of Finance Committee. Some of them, I understand, according to the program, you'll have a chance to meet, and for the members of the Committee of Economy, the supervisors of other ministries in the government. But I think that we can say with certain satisfaction that in the recent years, Knesset has become pretty professional in this field of activities of supervising the government, the legislation, the budget activities of the government, and definitely the fiscal policy of the government. And as we all know, that there is no bar exam for newly elected members of Knesset that will demand a certain amount of knowledge in economy or stock markets or anything of the kind. I would take this opportunity to thank all the professionals involved that worked hard, especially with newly elected members of Knesset, especially with the members of the relevant committees, to make sure that it's not just raising hands, but deep and deeper understanding of the issues, of the paragraphs, of sometimes very professional language. I even don't want to say purposely used for certain paragraphs in order to make things even more complicated. But we see of late the examples of members of Knesset, members of Parliament, elected officials that demand very particular explanations about every figure, every sentence, every paragraph. And the example I would just share with you is something that I'm absolutely sure is known to many of you, something that since 1985 in this building always accompanies the budget law, and it's called the Arrangements Law, or the Economic Arrangements Law. For those parliaments who are probably less familiar with the practice, it's the legislation of the government that comes together with the budget and is supposed to support the budget in terms of certain reforms, sometimes freezing certain legislations, sometimes introducing certain new arrangements in the state economy. I use the word supposes not by chance. I think that what we've seen developing since 1985 was a very convenient form of legislation for the government, and alongside with the paragraphs, the legislations that were really an indivisible part of the state budget, we could find in this very thick book a lot of things that had, shall we in a politically correct manner say, had very little to do with the budget, definitely was the budget of the coming year, and in many cases it was an attempt in the usual arm wrestling between the government and the legislature, an attempt to push certain legislations or reforms without going through a due process of separately legislating them in different committees, as opposed to normal form of legislating. The arrangement law, at least according to the government, should all go into the Finance Committee, where it should all be discussed and voted as one piece of legislation. I have to say that at least my three predecessors started a very tiresome process of negotiating the arrangements law with the government, and I had the privilege to continue that last year. And I think that what we are seeing of late is a certain, or even a meaningful narrowing down of the arrangements law. Most of the things that we see these days, at least in the final version of the arrangements law that gets to the plenary session for votes, is really paragraphs, legislations directly, even in terms of dates, dealing with the budget issues, and not an attempt to produce a number of legislations through an easy and speedy route. And here, once again, I do have to say that the change we witnessed last year was the fact that every member of Knesset, every colleague of mine, upon my request, got from the legal department and the research department of the Knesset a very exact list or table with a one-on-one description of every legislation in the arrangements law, and was able to judge by himself or by herself what belongs to the budget, what doesn't belong, what should be legislated in the Finance Committee, what has nothing to do with the Finance Committee of the Knesset. And I think the result was, how shall I put it, less vocal argument between the Knesset and the government, but rather a much more professional discussion of different things offered, and as a result, an agreement between the Finance Ministry and the Knesset, what stays and what goes out, even before the first discussion in the Finance Committee took place. I think it's here also kind of a role of your colleagues here in this building as far as this legislation is concerned. To sum up, you know, we can find not just examples of supervision, but initiatives by the Knesset. I think that members of Knesset would proudly tell you, those who you would be meeting during this seminar, that of late there was a big piece of legislation. There was a big piece of legislation dealing with the concentration. The concentration of power in Israeli economy, and the Finance Committee, or rather a special subcommittee in the Finance Committee, was dealing with the situation in Israeli economy in terms of monopolies for months and months, with, let's put it on the table, with serious lobbying from banks, from different companies. And I do have to compliment my colleagues that in not a single case there was any yielding to the lobbying process here. I think that there was a very serious discussion, the longest, I've said, discussion going on. The result is the legislation voted in the end of the session of the Knesset that will restructure certain parts of Israeli economy. I sincerely hope that it will be also serving the public in this country, the constituency of the members of Knesset, at the same time, without, God forbid, becoming populistic, and without reforming economy in a way that probably belongs to the past century and not to the 21st century, where things are pretty open and the market plays its role. I will finish by saying that once again I want to welcome you all. I want to again thank all the organizers, specifically representatives of the Department of Research and Information, Mr. Armit Sadiq, Mr. Eliezer Schwartz, and the director, whom I already mentioned, Dr. Shirley Abrami, right here. And I just sincerely hope that the result of these discussions will be the exchange of best practices and the best understanding of different processes that are mutual to our countries. And I sincerely hope too that this cooperation will stay not just as a one-time meeting, but rather an ongoing process for the better of the peoples of different countries represented by different parliaments here. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.